So as you know, Halloween just passed. It is also heralded as the spookiest time of the year. So in the spirit of being spooky, let me share with you some pretty scary statistics. In the 1950s, the obesity rate in the United States was less than 10%. In 2010, just 60 short years later, the obesity rate in America was at a whopping 35%. Now that is truly scary. Granted, the BMI, body mass index charts that were used to gather this data are not always the best standard of measurement. For instance, according to the BMI chart, I am at the upper end of the overweight category at 28% body fat. However, I am actually 12% body fat. So although there are some discrepancies with the BMI chart, there has clearly been an increase in the percentage of people falling into the obese category. So given the rise of the fast food and processed food in the latter half of the 20th century into the beginning of the 21st, I think there is some clear relation. You'd be hard pressed to find someone that doesn't eat fast food at least once a month, with most people probably partaking a lot more frequently. I would even be willing to wager that most of us have eaten fast food, or at least some form of processed food within the past few weeks. And there's no wonder why. With the fast food restaurants nearly on every block and the significantly lower price of the processed junk foods, not to mention the fast-paced society that we live in, it's just easier to eat the junk. So today I'd like to talk with you about first the obesity epidemic and the health concerns that it raises. Second, I want to talk about how the fast food culture relates to the rise in obesity. And then finally, I want to talk about how we can combat it. I'll begin by talking about the health concerns presented by the obesity epidemic. The elevated percentage of obese people has clearly had an impact on the overall health of society. Obesity causes or is closely linked to numerous health conditions. The number one leading cause of death in the United States is now heart disease. It has overtaken cancer. In 2014, 614,368 people died from heart disease. And heart disease is directly related to poor cardiovascular health and obesity. Not only is obesity closely linked to heart disease, but fast food and processed foods, which are extremely high in bad fats and sodium, if they're consumed excessively, contribute directly to heart disease. But obesity's effects are not just limited to heart disease alone. There are many various conditions and diseases related to it. For instance, stroke, hypertension, dyslipidemia, gastrointestinal or liver disease, musculoskeletal problems, reproductive and neurological problems, respiratory problems, and diabetes. Diabetes has been one of the areas most affected by the fast food culture. In 1980, there were 5.5 million people with diabetes. And in 2014, there were 22 million people affected by it. And these are just the people that know about it. It's really easy to have diabetes and not even know. Matter of fact, 80% of the people that have diabetes didn't know they had it until some blood work was done for something else. That's how they discovered, because the symptoms are just so easily concealed. So there's actually probably a lot more people being affected by it. So it's clear that obesity greatly affects the overall health of people. Now I want to talk about how the explosion of the fast food culture and the obesity crisis are directly linked. So earlier I mentioned some statistics about how the obesity rate has changed since 1950. The use of 1950 was not random. Coincidentally, McDonald's came onto the scene in 1945 and rose to prominence in the U.S. throughout the following decades. Following behind the McDonald's platform, many other fast food chains began to spring up. There are now more than 160,000 fast food restaurants, and they together gross more than $110 billion. So not only has the fast food industry exploded, but so has the amount of processed foods out there. Just look at pretty much any label on a food item, barring that it isn't fresh produce, and I guarantee that there will be some word on the ingredient list that you cannot even pronounce. 100 years ago, no one had ever even heard of sodium benzoate or partially hydrogenated oils, and you see those words on most processed food labels. So just think about this. At no point in history has obesity been as prevalent in the general public as it is now. And all that occurred over just 60 short years. Where will we be 120 years from now? Is it possible? It's impossible to tell the future, but if something doesn't change, we could be in for some big trouble. So the only way to combat this epidemic is to make healthier food choices, because unhealthy food is at the root of the problem. I hear it all the time. It's too expensive to eat healthy. And I have to admit, there is a good deal of truth to it. However, it is entirely possible to eat a nutritious, balanced diet even on a budget. However, that is not the problem that most people will face. The problem that most people will face is the lack of time. We live in a fast-paced society where most people don't have time to do basic things. Like, I've been in that situation quite often. With my schedule, I don't eat lunch most days. It's not healthy, but it is what it is. This can be remedied, however, by planning your meals and meal prepping for the week. You may have to take some time out from your weekend, but it will eliminate the time crunch that often leads you to a fast food drive-thru. So as you can easily see, our society has been willfully eating our health into a state of detriment. I've told you about the statistic proof of the obesity epidemic, and I've also given examples about how detrimental it can be to the general health of individuals. I've also showed the relationship between processed and fast food boom and the ever-growing obesity rate. And then I finished by discussing some possible solutions to the problem at hand. So although it is easy to write off all of this as just being numbers with no real substance to them, I would implore you not to. This is a real issue with real consequences. I'm sure all of you can think of at least one person in your family that may be overweight and has struggled with it in the past. I have multiple family members that have had heart stents at 50 or are currently suffering from joint problems associated with the strain of their body weight. It's a problem that even my parents are struggling with, and one that I've been trying to help them with. I tell them all the time that I want them to be able to be active in the lives of their grandchildren and hope that it motivates them. Because if they keep going like they are now, they're subject to fall to some of the diseases that have become so prevalent in this recent boom of obesity. So I'll leave you with this thought. You only have one life, and you only get one body. It's yours to do with it as you please, but with that being said, it is imperative that you take care of yours, because after all, you only get one shot. If we all strive to be healthier and live active lives, we can reverse the epidemic and take our lives back from the fast food culture that we've allowed to take over.